like to share a story with you that's become quite pertinent in these times, more so than, originally. And it started when I was asked by a group of coaches that included some friends to come and help pilot Agile in the clinical research division of a big pharma. So I've been very fortunate in my life. I've been at the right place at the right time a lot of the time. And I thought, well, this is one of them, because not only was it a chance to work with colleagues that I haven't worked with in a long time, it was also my particular group that I was going to be working with was based in Basel in Switzerland. And am I sharing my screen? Because all of a sudden I see all of you. Am I sharing my screen?
I can see it, but I don't know if
yes, you are.
Great.
I can see it, Antoinette. Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay, so right. So so it sounded all very wonderful, and I had visions of visiting Switzerland, which I've never seen. And little did I know what was going to happen. So the organization is a giant. They bought an American giant pharma a few years ago. They were very well represented in Europe and the US. They had a purpose I could identify with. They only developed meds for people with terminal illnesses. So it was literally, they literally in the business for life or death of people, which I thought was quite noble, and I was really keen to work with them. So when I started with them, I didn't know this, and I think now all of us know this, but it generally takes about 10 years to launch a new medicine. It starts with the discovery of the molecule that would help, and then it has to go through a series of clinical trials, and there is a lot of red tape. You can imagine when we work with medicine, if you think about how we feel about the vaccine now, people are worried because we don't know whether we're going to, grow horns or, third eyes or something. So they have to be really careful. But included in this process also is a lot of red tape, a lot of unnecessary red tape and rework. And it's really important for medical organizations to get the drugs out there as quickly as possible, because after 10 years, the molecule that originally was developed into the drug becomes available to everybody. That's when we get the generics, So if we look at the engagement itself, we were asked, there were 8 of us that were asked to pilot with teams in clinical research. The teams we were partnering with were between about 80 and 120 people, and they were already cross-functional, So they had an initiative the previous year, and they had been mixing not only researchers in the teams like they used to, but they had the marketing people in there, they had the regulatory people in there, the medical writers, they were already cross-functional. So another thing that also looked really, for all intents and purpose, from where I stood, it looked like this was a really going to be a really good engagement. They also had what they called a performance coach, a trained professional coach that were helping and supporting a group of about 8 to 12 people, 8 to 12 teams in terms of just generic coaching, individual and business coaching. So I met my leadership team virtually, and it's actually quite funny because I met them at the Business Agility Conference in New York City virtually about 2 years ago. So, and I gave them a short overview about, how Agile coaches enter a system. So, that we would normally, do a little bit of training, a little bit of finding out what to do, and then we would see what comes up in terms of where agility could make a difference, and we work with a prioritized backlog, etc., etc. Okay, so it really sounded at this point, I mean, they were very open, and it really sounded like things were, you know, I'd have quite a good chance to succeed with this team. So, and you know, like in the words of one of my musical heroes, it sounded like we would make a perfect pair. And it was only at the end of this conversation, like in the last 5 minutes, that the problem that I was going to struggle with for the rest of the engagement raised its head. It seemed that my team was not in Basel only. They were in Basel, they were in Welland in the UK, and they were also in San Francisco. Okay, so this is a problem that we've now over the last year become a lot more familiar with, but it really meant that we had 2 hours every day, okay, that people could people could get together, and those 2 hours were already chock-a-block with meetings, with sharing things, you know. So the first problem was, when on earth was I going to ever get a chance to speak to this team and share anything and work with them at all? Okay, so their request to me, like, you know, most groups, they didn't know what to expect of this whole Agile effort. So their request to me was, please, can you give us some tools? You know, we want to go faster. That's why we want to go Agile. You know, we want to go faster. So I contracted with the leadership team individually and together, you know, and just we spoke about some of the expectations they could have. And we agreed on what we would be focusing on for it was originally going to be 3 months, you know, part-time, but 3 months that I would work with them. And then the next thing is now to get the bigger team together, you know, to, I mean, Agile is the answer to a problem, you know. Agile is we bring Agile as a solution. We need to know what the problem is that we're trying to solve. Well, in order to do that, that was a real big problem, you know. So it was not that they were unwilling. They were very willing, but they were just extremely busy. I mean, really devoted people. As I said, working on drugs that could save lives. So those 2 golden hours every day was all they had, and they were already full. Apart from that, they were also traveling all the time, you know, traveling to medical conferences, FDA meetings, you know, so really it was herding cats like you can't believe. So as Agile coaches, we know that we need to come up with some kind of a working agreement, a team alliance at the beginning, otherwise things go south. Well, my first problem was, what do you do when you don't even get people together to come up with that working agreement or that team alliance in the first place? Okay. So in 2 months, you know, I take a very strong coaching approach, so I'm not going to push people and direct them. So in 2 months, I had an hour here, an hour there. You know, what normally takes me a week or so in elapsed time had taken 2 months. So that wasn't all. The leadership team had a real crackerjack project manager who managed to miraculously just make stuff happen. And that was until she fell down a flight of stairs and broke her leg in 3 places and was indefinitely off from work. At the same time, the PA, who was my second person to go to, she injured her back and she had to get an operation. So all of a sudden, there was absolutely, you sit with these teams across the world, and there was absolutely no way to contact people to even get them together, to find out, you know, what time can we all get together. So from the beginning, you know, this is something I always do in my engagement. From the beginning, we had a 30-minute meeting every week as the leadership team of the, you know, of the whole engagement, and to talk about impediments and what our focus for the next week would be. So we were just going nowhere. I had done individual interviews with various team members, but we had done no collective sessions. So in terms of finding out what's going on in the system, I could make up a whole bunch of stories. And we all know that, we all have parts of the truth, but unless we get people together to talk and together, nobody's really understands exactly what's going on. So my very cooperative leadership team felt the pain, and then decided to limit my focus just on the product development team, who were mostly based in one place. Okay, so notice that even still, we couldn't get the head of the product development in this meeting to make this decision. But if we waited just for all 4 members of the leadership team to be present, we would delay the start with another month, and it was already 2 months in, and we were supposed to just have another month to do this. So they made the decision, spoke to her, and she was fortunately very open to this. Okay. So in the meantime, what I'd done is through individual interviews and 1 or 2 small group sessions, I prepared a summary of the things that I made up was going on that were not working so well, or that people were challenged with. Okay, so if I summarize it for you, on the plus side, they were a really healthy, engaged team with good leadership and a good product. Okay, most of the people had PhDs, and a large number of them even had double PhDs. So they were really brilliant researchers, and they were dedicated, and that was one of the biggest problems. They were working harder and harder and harder to get stuff done. So the overall WIP, nothing different here than in most commercial organizations. Overall WIP was really just standing in the way of a whole lot of good things that could be happening. Okay, so ultimately there were 5 areas we suggested some focus on. The first one was, or one of the ones was that work overload. Okay, but the other 2 big ones was there was a massive amount of rework. It had various causes, and not least of it, the relationship with the external partner, who also held the purse strings. So very often you find that the molecule for a medicine is discovered by a small biotech company, and because they don't have the massive amounts of money, I mean, these people talk in millions of euros, so if we do it like this, we can save about 10 million euros, is something that you would often hear in a conversation. So small biotech companies generally don't have the resources to do these large clinical trials. So then what happens is that they partner up with a large pharma to do that. And there was a lot of stress and tension in this relationship. Okay, so also within the organization, because it's such a huge organization, the strategic direction was not always clear. So also often in the pharma companies, you get that they have 2 competing drugs, in different parts of the organization, and it depends on, because they don't know, I mean, it's all experimental, so they don't know which one is ultimately going to be the most successful. So there's even competition within the organizations. The other thing was, it was very clear to me that the 2 hours that they had each day, the 2 golden hours, like I called it, was spent in a rather unproductive way. So very often it consisted of somebody walking through a real immaculate slide deck. They placed great value on doing quality everything. So even for internal conversations, they would really spend time on perfecting slide decks, when actually the aim of it was just to convey some information. And there would be upwards of 40 people on the call, all without video, and on mute, and absolutely just a one-way conversation. So 80% of this of the time was just, it was not collaborative at all. It could have been done in a different way. So those were the 3 big things that they that they came up with. And the approach that we were going to do was action learning, so which is basically coming up with a hypothesis about what can improve a problem with the people experiencing the problem, and then defining an experiment, putting it into action, and then reviewing the outcome of that and seeing what the learning was, whether we need to pivot or enhance the experiment. So of the experiments, just in terms of being an Agile coach, only 4 of them really had an Agile flavor per se. So the problems that stood in their way, it was quite clear to me that they needed a lot more than Agile tools, which is what they were asking for in the beginning. So we started, I based those 12 experiments and the suggestions of the 12 experiments on the small part of the picture that I could see. But really, we had to have a kickoff where we discussed what I saw and we built it out and prioritized. Okay, so I flew to the UK for a few days, full of hope and enthusiasm, since now we're really going to get it going. And there were a full 5 people that could show up of the 120, So the leaders were there, supportive, open as always. The marketing lead could only attend late afternoon because he was based in San Francisco, and the product lead was traveling to some meeting or some conference, I can't remember. Okay, but still, the 5 people that were there, suggested some tweaks. They prioritized the experiments and based on value to them. And we ended up selecting the top 3 only. Okay, and we ended up selecting one that I did not anticipate we would, which was the interaction with their external partner. That was the top one. They wanted to do visualizing their work so that they could reduce their WIP, and they wanted to do retrospectives on a bigger scale. So I contacted everybody. We managed to get 3 hours free on the day after. Okay, the day after, there were 2 of them at the office. So I've never had this problem because I always, the first thing I always do is, to make an alliance with them, how we will work together, etc. So, like I said, the problem was that I could just never get them together to do this with them. So I kept on raising it as a concern, and finally the leader said, okay, so we've got an idea. We are going to have a quarterly offsite. It's at one of the big medicine conventions, and we're going to give you a day so that you could actually do your work on doing an alliance and a little bit of education, and perhaps we can make a big dent in those experiments. Okay, so in the meantime, we just continued with the retrospectives because people reported real changes in their thinking, their process, and their attitude as a result of these tiny 1-hour retrospectives that we were having weekly. So my hypothesis was that if I could do something with them so that they get what visualizing the work and what working with WIP that we see when we visualize the work, what that could bring, we could start working on that. Okay, so I was really, the experiments were kind of simple. I mean, ultimately we decided that we would do the experiment on the relationship, which was the big problem. We would do a very simple experiment for that. We would simply ask the partner company whether they'd be willing to spend 2 hours talking about their relationship. And they agreed, so we started lining up things to get going. And Lugano is where we were going to spend a big amount of time, on coming up with solutions and more experiments and, etc. In the meantime, with the rest of the Agile coaches, things were really tough. So everybody was having the same problem, this problem of, well, we don't we don't have time to spend on the Agile pilot, and that's one of the major things when organizations start thinking about adopting Agile, is to think about, well, do we actually have the time to spend on this transformation? Okay, so because by this stage, I mean, this was about 2 months in. Okay, by this stage, several people had already stopped their pilots. Okay, so several of the 8 pilots, I think there were already 4 pilots that were stopped at this point, simply because the Agile coaches could not find a spot of time to work with the teams together. And of course, that's a sign of what's going on in the organization. If it was impossible to find a place where people would collaborate already and piggyback onto those collaborations in terms of bringing in new thinking around Agile, Agile practices, or even Agile thinking, that's a serious red light for an Agile transformation. Okay. So there were a couple of other things, but I want to get to some stuff about leadership, so I'll spare you the details of that. Okay, my focus was still, so I was still gonna in Lugano. Lugano is where we're gonna all get together. So if I take you a little bit of a detour, so I love James Bond movies. I get sort of kind of uncomfortable with all the machismo in there sometimes. But in the James Bond movies, they go to these exotic locations. It's really beautiful places. Well, Lugano is one of those places. It's on a lake, it's close to the border of Italy. And it's just mountains and lakes and really rich people. I mean, it's a chance for you to see how the other half lives. So it was beautiful. It's from a nature point of view, it was really beautiful. I stayed in the fanciest hotel that I've ever stayed in. I'll tell you, they had Clarence in the, I'm just a Boer Macy, from South Africa. So for me, they had Clarence in the bathroom for the soaps, etc. This was like very fancy schmancy. So I was so prepared for this face-to-face session that I probably was a little bit over-prepared, so I had a plan that we were going to do a game first, and then we would do an team alliance. I had 6 hours. Well, we started 1.5 hours late, because they were busy with some other things. So I had to cut something. I really, really, really wanted to illustrate the impact of WIP to them. And I had a really great game, Klaus Leopold's boat building game. So that's what we did. And man, that was like a major mistake, a big mistake. So never will I ever play paper folding games with busy PhDs again. So halfway through, it felt like all the air had left the room. Still, the insights were really good, and a good discussion followed. And the choice at that stage was, do we go ahead with the team alliance that I've been trying to do for 4 flipping months, or do I give them the time to have this big discussion that they've been wanting to have for 3 months about something else, but because they also never get together, they haven't had it. So I decided, okay, fine. I will facilitate that discussion for them, and it was great. They had a resolution, and things went ahead. And actually, we celebrated with Dom Perignon in the evening because of the results of that discussion. Still, for me, I felt utterly defeated. I pinned all my hope on sort of starting some kind of Agile transformation with them in Lugano, and it kind of fell flat. So a few days afterwards, I had a call with the internal performance coach that was supporting my team, and she joined the Lugano meeting virtually, so she knew what had happened, and it was a tough conversation, but something she said in passing just struck me. She asked me why Agile coaches always have to be in the spotlight, why they have to run the show, why they have to come up with things to do and a plan, etc. And whilst I knew some of the legitimate answers to that, because generally we lead training, we bring in some of the Agile events, etc. But what she said next really struck me. She said to me, "Why can't you just be of service to the team?" And I realized that even as a professionally trained coach, I'd missed the point. I was trying to lead a whole bunch of things with the team because I considered my job to be increasing their agility. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't my real job. So I let go. And the team really surprised me. The same week, they had their first self-facilitated retrospective, and they came up with a really impactful improvement. Okay. So for me, I just went, okay, wow, this stuff really does work. So in the process, I realized something. I was being blinded by all the things that as a consultant, an Agile consultant, I could see the team could change and do. I had a vision. I had my own vision for where they could go. When in fact, no guidelines for agility in clinical research even exists. And even if it did, who cares? How arrogant to think that I know better than they do what the most pressing matters for them are. So I stopped fighting behind the scenes, agonizing with myself, and I relaxed and I simply kept on asking, what's the next most important thing for us to solve? And things changed, and as a matter of fact, this was not news to me. I've been an Agile coach for over 10 years. I have been training Agile coaches for more than 5 years. Like I said, I'm a trained professional coach myself, where we always hold the client's agenda first and not our own agenda. But somehow in the midst of this frustration of, according to me, no progress, I reverted, or I was tempted to revert to the behavior that sadly a lot of Agile coaches see as coaching, abandoning the client's agenda and just wanting to get them more agile. So I don't know whether Agilists realize this, but often we revert to the same behavior that we are trying to change, wanting people to be different than they are. I didn't, it was damn close. I didn't, but it was taking huge self-management for me not to. So, and when I finally relaxed and I just became a coach again, I was able to bring everything in my toolbox to a system. Okay. So it really reminded me of the fact that Agile is a really great tool to solve complex problems, but it's just a tool. We've got many others. Okay. So what I brought in terms of their relationship with their partner was the single biggest impact to them. I speak to them still from time to time. So they reckon that they reduced the rework that they did by about 40% as a result of the increased relationship or the increased quality of the relationship with their outside partner. So 40% of their total budget is a mega amount of work, and it had nothing to do with Agile, except maybe that it was about individuals and interactions. So we did try a couple of other Agile experiments, practices as experiments as well. Some of them worked, some of them didn't work. So some of the teams utilized boards, visualizing their work really well. Others didn't like it at all. Certainly the alignment session for me with the leadership team, the weekly alignment, that was the most useful. They really were resourceful about resolving impediments. And the practice that they found the most useful overall, and that they still consider, I checked in with them, yesterday actually, just to find out how it was going for this talk. So they're still faithfully holding their retrospectives, they reflect, and they come up with a small improvement for the next week. So I've left them at the end of September 2019. Some of the other things that I also did that they found useful was we'd been recording an education session on a topic of their choice every week. So, you know, so in Agile, how do you do this? I'm sure those of you Agile coaches know that phrase quite often. So, and the topics varied, you know, and sometimes it was about Agile and sometimes it was simply about collaboration. Okay. So, excuse me, they were still keen to learn about things like flow and limiting WIP. You know, so those were also covered eventually. And I developed quite a few how-to guides. Was there more to do? Absolutely. They knew that, you know, we'd only scratched the surface. But they did what they had appetite for. And as a result, they kept on doing it and they're still doing it. So the impact, you know, the impact was really, like I said, that reduced rework. Okay. There was actual collaboration as well. You know, in the beginning, there was just cooperation. It ended up being active collaboration. Okay. So they improved their own focus internally as a result of just speaking to one another in retros and thinking about things in retros. Okay. You know, a big win for them. They were really celebrated that they were with, okay, somebody's got a lot of noise, by the way. They were really chuffed that at one FDA meeting, they went with another team from the same company, and the feedback from the FDA meeting, because of the way that they had been working, took them 2 hours to fix, whilst the other team took 2 weeks. They were really proud about that. Okay, so, you know, quite a few things. The things that you see on the impact is what is self-reported. Was there more work? Absolutely, you know. But firstly, some things in the bigger organization, and I mean, this organization is a giant. Some things in the organization would have to change. Okay. So, and some of these things have continued changing. I mean, so I know in this organization, they now are starting to bring in agility into all their major national concerns across the world. So some of the things have started to change in the organization. Okay. So I would like to just stand still. The big thing for me, there were only 2 of us who managed to keep our pilots going and whose pilots were deemed successful. The other 6 coaches, you know, their pilots were stopped prematurely. And I don't think that's because necessarily the 2 of us that kept going were so much better than any of the other coaches. I would like to point out that there were 6 guys in the group and 2 women, and it's the 2 women whose pilots carried on. I'm just saying, okay. So, but really, what I think made the difference in my pilot particularly is how the leaders showed up and what they were willing to do. Okay, so they were not sitting back and waiting for me to bring the Agile. Okay, they really realized quite early on that they have to do some things. And I thought what I'd share with you, and I'll give you a minute to read the next slide. I've got a friend, Lunur Koemans, who was the lead coach in the ING. You know, ING Bank is often cited as a big success. And this slide comes from her. I'll give you a minute to read about, as leaders, what leaders will need to give up. So for me, when I look at this, and you know, and this mirrors my own experience, leadership development is personal development, and agility relies on leadership development. Leadership development, leaders are not only sitting at the top of organizations. Agile coaches are leaders too. In fact, when we bring agility into an organization, we bring self-management and self-organization, which actually asks the leadership within each and every one of us to develop and come to the fore. Okay, that's hard. Personal development is work. You know, most of us are quite keen to keep on being the way that we are. So when Agilists complain about leaders, the thought that always plays in the back of my mind, how eager are you to develop yourself? You know, if we want to have organizations where leadership is shared amongst the entire organization, we have to step up our own leadership. So, okay, so as a leader, though, if we put the shoe on the other foot, as a leader, you know, Agile coaching is a profession that only came up in the last 10, 11 years. And Agile coaching is a really, really useful way for organizations to, you know, take that change on board themselves. What should you be looking for? How can you get the most out of your own coach? So, like I say, you know, make sure that you are involved, okay? Make sure that you are willing to change yourself as well, and that Agile is not something that you see an Agile coach doing with those that are, you know, reporting into you. Make sure that you choose the right Agile coach, you know, because ultimately, a good Agile coach will follow your guidelines. A good Agile coach will ask you, where is it that Agile is going to make a difference? Why are you bringing in Agile? Okay. So you need to be clear, and you need to lead your own effort. You need to not, abdicate the responsibility for your Agile transformation to somebody that's coming in from the outside. That is very, very risky to do. So really, what I'd like you to leave with is just the thought that we are in this together. Okay, as whether you're an Agilist, whether you're an organizational leader, we are in this together, and we have to discover, especially in business agility. You know, we still had things like Scrum in the software industry, but in terms of business agility, who knows what business agility looks like in an industry? And even if we do know, you know, it's going to be changing tomorrow if we truly live and breathe continuous improvement. Okay, and that's it from me.